Folks, over the last year, I've been pulled into more conversations about value selling than at any point in my career to date. Now, those examples include capital equipment manufacturers that want to behave more like SaaS companies making value offers, products from different portfolios that, when stitched together, are suddenly sold as outcomes rather than the makeup of the products. Clients I'm serving who insist that we contract by placing the entirety of my fees at risk, or the latest set of AI-enabled features that must go to market by command of a premium price because, well, AI, it's the reason that we've been given. And in nearly every one of these conversations, the mandate sounds the same. Please help us price this on value. And what's striking isn't the ambition. It's actually the assumption that sits underneath it. Value selling initiatives really don't fail because the leaders lack ambition or enthusiasm. They really fail because organizations assume customers are ready to buy differently simply because we've decided to sell differently. There's an unspoken belief. And it's if we change how we price, customers will change how they buy. And that belief is almost always wrong. Now, here's a provocation that I want to start today with and then quickly set aside. And it is about AI because the subject today is not AI, but let's take the AI provocation first. And that's this. AI has accelerated the confusion between qualification and differentiation, where qualification means I have the right to compete and differentiation means I have the right to price at a premium. Now, internally to most of the companies that I'm serving, AI feels like a differentiator. I get to charge more. Externally, customers increasingly are treating it as table stakes. So to be clear, many buyers are not saying, well, I'll pay more because you have AI. They're saying, actually, AI qualifies you to compete against the others who already have it too. And by the way, if it reduced your cost to serve me, why exactly are you asking me to pay more? That gap between how we see value and how customers experience value is where most value selling efforts break down. And my fellow pricing leaders, that is not a pricing failure, that's a sequencing failure. We're often trying to monetize a belief that the customer doesn't hold just yet. We're being asked to price an aspiration. So what about this discussion? Well, this isn't a talk about AI pricing. AI just has been making this problem impossible to ignore. Before I go any further, let me be explicit about who this conversation is actually for. Now, I know that some of you are responsible for taking traditional transactional products and moving them toward value-based, outcome-based, SaaS-like offerings. And others of you are great pricers. I see the audience here. And you're great pricers who are now advising or consulting and, as a consequence or result, are trying to structure value-based, outcome-based, gain share-based for that measurable benefit that pricing creates. And you've seen it, and we've seen it for decades. It creates a lot of value. It's great when you can pull it off. We're going to talk a little bit more about that too. This conversation is really for both groups because the underlying problem is largely the same. Until we educate buyers on how we are selling differently, they won't necessarily buy differently, no matter how elegant that value story sounds. So, what I keep seeing across nearly every client is a growing set of what I'm calling as rudderless assertions about value selling. They sound directional, they sound modern, they sound strategic, but when you take a look for evidence that they actually change how customers buy, well, that's often missing. So at this point, I think it's fair to call them myths. And today I'd like to do a little myth busting. Not to be provocative for its own sake, but because these beliefs quietly derail otherwise good intentions that at least one of the parties has. And if you have evidence that proves me wrong or it works differently, please, I genuinely want to hear about it. As Brad said, what I'm saying right now in monologue is 20 minutes, and then we've got another 40 minutes to spend on Q&A and to get into some of the details on that, and that's where the fun is going to exist. But let's set the foundation and set one note quickly before we get to the myths. I'm not calling these out from a safe distance. Every one of them is a rake I have personally stepped on, usually while trying to do the right thing, usually under pressure, and usually convinced that this time it was going to be different. So if any of this feels familiar, it's not because somebody messed up. It's really because this is what it actually looks like when organizations try to take the shift from selling products to selling value. All right, let's move forward with myth number one. I'm going to take a little sip of water before I do that. And I'm back. Myth number one. If we change how we price, customers will change how they buy. First myth I encounter almost everywhere. The belief is that pricing can lead customer behavior, that if we introduce a new pricing model, subscription, usage-based, outcome-based, even fixed fee, customers will naturally engage differently. But pricing doesn't teach customers how to buy. Pricing reflects a buying model that, at least in their mind, already exists. When customers don't change how they buy, we might interpret it as resistance or sales weakness or messaging problems, but more often than not, it's a signal that we're asking pricing to perform a behavioral change. And pricing can't do that alone. Now, that's an important caveat. Can't do it alone. We'll talk about that in a moment. This is where both product leaders and advisors tend to hit the same wall. We'll change the offer, we'll change the price, we'll change the language, but we don't change the buyer's understanding of what's being asked of them, specifically, financially, operationally, or in terms of risk or their or the organization's accountability. And when buyers haven't been educated on how we buy differently, they default to buying the way they always have. Myth number two. Well, in response to myth number one, if we just articulate value clearly enough, customers are going to recognize it. That second myth is that value becomes real because we say it clearly. And that if the value story is compelling enough, outcomes, ROI, transformation, things that they can see, customers will naturally see it the way we do. However, value doesn't become real because it's articulated. It becomes real when customers can place it inside their own decision logic or their own review and compensation structures. I'm actually reviewed as a result or success of this value statement. That's really important. So what I've seen is clients and customers respond with this, and you've heard it before, well, I think that's just priced too high. And it so often doesn't mean what we think it means. In most cases, it's shorthand for, I actually don't believe you, I actually don't see myself in this, or I don't trust that this is actually going to work out. So when value hasn't landed, price becomes a convenient excuse. The scapegoating we've all come to know, but of course not love. So here's the harder truth that doesn't get talked about enough. I'm often brought into organizations that want to move to value pricing or value selling, but they can't clearly articulate their own value story. Also known as, this is the definition, the quantification of how my product adds to your company that is well beyond what and how you typically pay for it. The value story. In those cases, the issue isn't that the value story isn't landing. It's that in many cases, in many of the companies that I serve, the value story doesn't exist yet. Why? Because they're selling product, they're selling features, they're selling things they think their customers want to buy, and they haven't been able to create the value story itself, the story that has a value in it. You can't make value meaningfully externally until it's been clarified and aligned internally. Going back to this notion of sequencing, Let's get the value story straight and then start working to the value pricing. And just to be clear, talking about the thrill of new products, features like AI, and expecting to land a different payment scheme is what we pricers call the definition of crazy. Okay. At this point, some of you might be thinking, well, yeah, thanks, John, but there are absolutely AI offerings being sold based on outcome, and they actually work. And you are right. And there are a limited set of examples where selling based on value, based on outcome works. But when you look closely at the ones that do work, the reason they succeed actually proves the point that I'm making, not the opposite. And here's two concrete examples. The first one is one I think many have seen in terms of AI-driven customer support. It's this customer support that charges based on resolved case, not on tickets created, not on conversations, not on seats, but on cases that have actually been resolved. Now, on the surface, this looks like textbook value-based pricing, but here's what actually makes it work. First, it's sold to a different buyer. Not the tooling owner, not IT, not procurement, not to sales. It's someone who owns cost to serve an operating expense, often with P&L visibility associated with that, or accountability even. And then second, it's not really pricing, it's financing. The cost is predictable, it's bounded, it's budgetable for the customer. And if volume goes up, cost goes up, but value goes up along with it. The buyer can model that trade-off and live with the risks associated with it. And usually the offer is made as, this was your customer service costs previously for resolved case. This is your new cost, or the price that we're setting. And it can be placed into a budget and terms and conditions associated with a contract, understandings until both parties get used to the new way of working. Here's a second example. It's my own experience with outcome-based pricing in professional service. In every outcome-based engagement I've ever been involved with, there's a pattern that never changes. I was never selling outcome-based pricing or gain share pricing to procurement, and I was never selling it to the economic buyer at the start, ever. Outcome-based economics only entered into the conversation after the solution had already been envisioned. This is what good looks like. This is when the value was understood associated with what good looks like, when the confidence was established, when the discussion shifted from, do we really want this, both parties, to how do we pay for it responsibly? And then that conversation always looped in the CFO or somebody with finance authority, because outcome-based pricing isn't necessarily a sales tactic. It's not a Hail Mary pass to try to distract a client when they're about to go with one of our competitors. It's a risk sharing and financial decision. And you don't ask someone without financial authority to own variable risk, no matter how compelling the value story is by itself. So when AI value narratives fail, it's often not resistance to value, it's a governance problem. When outcome-based models work, it's not because we found a better pricing scheme, it's because we changed who buys, when they buy, and how risk is carried over a period of time. Myth number 3, value selling is a pricing initiative. The third myth is one that puts us, this audience, chief pricing officers, in the most difficult position. Value selling initiatives don't fail because pricing leaders avoid responsibility. They fail because pricing is asked to solve a problem the organization hasn't aligned on yet. Alignment, that's an important word. When leadership says we're moving to value selling, the right response from the chief pricing officer is not, well, that's not my job. Well, because it is your job. Just not as a pricing exercise. It's your job to surface the questions the organization hasn't answered yet, to connect ambition to reality, strategy to buying behaviors, value stories to how customers actually decide, and who decides at the customer. Most leadership teams think they're asking pricing for a model. And what they're really asking for, whether they realize it or not, is to help align the organization around what value actually means, who it's for, and how it shows up in a buying decision. Now, this is where the chief pricing officer, all of you become indispensable, not as a person who invents the pricing model, although that's necessary, but as the person who forces the coherence. And it's coherence between what we say we sell and what customers believe we sell, the buyer we target and the risk they're allowed to carry. And quite frankly, hopefully there's some alignment on the risk that we're allowed to carry, and the outcomes we promise and the economics we attach to them. So that's not avoiding work. That's actually the hardest work in the room. And making everybody aware that these things need to be answered before moving forward is important. It's not about, we're not slowing down business here. Actually, we're just doing it in the right order. So let me leave you with a broader idea, and I hope it sticks after today. Making value meaningful is not about finding the right pricing model. It's about making sure the organization is aligned on what customers are capable of buying, who is willing to own the risk, and what has to be true for customers to buy differently than they do today. Pricing, in a larger sense, reveals whether that work has to be done. That's our job. That's what's incumbent on us. This applies differently depending on where your organization is in their maturity. Product companies trying to move forward or trying to move into a SaaS realm or a managed services realm or an outcome-based models face a different journey than professional services firms who are trying very hard to make their value visible and then ultimately defensible. But both have to run into the same constraint. You can't price, package, or sell value that hasn't been clarified, understood, and most importantly, owned, both internally, how we're going to market, and externally in terms of what the client is willing to step up for and sign up to. In many cases, the most important work isn't changing the pricing model. It's doing the harder work of figuring out what you actually stand for, like the value stories, and teaching customers how to buy that difference. That's why this conversation belongs squarely with chief pricing officers, not because pricing owns value selling, but because pricing sits at this intersection where all this misalignment shows up first. And getting out in front of that I think is the call to action today. So don't say no to value selling, say yes, but in the right order. So, and if there's some takeaway lines here, please consider the following three. We're trying to price a belief the customer doesn't hold yet. If customers aren't buying differently, they won't pay differently. And before we change how we price, we need to agree on what customers are actually buying and who inside the target company owns that outcome. So that's not slowing business down. That's actually preventing pricing from being used to paper over decision the organization hasn't made. And that, more than any pricing model, is how value becomes meaningful. All right, there's a few caveats I'd like to add before we get into discussion. I've spent most of my career trying to make value meaningful, not aspirational or rhetorical, but executable. Getting a customer or a client to want to buy differently is the necessary starting point, and that's what we've been focused on today. But when that moment arrives, when someone with financial authority says, well, yeah, we should be buying according to value, I do want your skin in the game, that's where the real work begins. At that point, what I do is typically probe for two things. Not opinions, not enthusiasm, some physical evidence of whether or not they're willing to move forward and an understanding of the maturity of what they just asked for. First, the value story that clearly explains why this initiative matters, to whom and in what way. And then secondly, a cash flow model that shows how value will be created, captured, sustained, and paid for. If those two things exist, and even imperfectly, in fact, even if those that we're working with identify that those two pieces are necessary, that's a great start. The rest of it then becomes solvable. And what is the rest of it? Well, the rest of it includes risk assessment, financial structure, implementation planning, measurement systems, governance and contracting of the overall offer, and then most importantly, leadership alignment. All of that can be built and is necessary for a successful value pricing or value selling program. If they don't exist, then no pricing model or contract structure is going to save the deal, because the organization is unfortunately not ready yet. Education has to come first. I've learned all of this the hard way over many years across many situations. And I'm increasingly convinced that the reason value-based programs fail isn't resistance. It's that too few people are ever shown concretely how to do this well. So here is an offer. Over the coming weeks, I'm willing to run a series of short 1-hour sessions where I walk through exactly how I do this, how I've built the value story, how I construct the cash flow model, and how I connect those to the financial, operational, and governance mechanics that make these deals real. So if that would be useful to you, I'm going to make it very simple. Please type in something in the chat, in the comments now that's like the I'm in, yes please, count me in, I'm there. Whatever works for you. And then in reaction to that, I can set up according to suggestion or need. That signal will tell me whether or not it's worth putting time into building these sessions. No sales pitch, no obligation, just a read on whether this kind of detail is of value to you. I'll go so far as to provide the beginnings of those details in our Q&A, which begins now. And with that, Bradley, do we have any comments or questions that have come in so far?
I am not seeing any questions that have come through on the chat, although if anyone has anything that they're wondering as well, feel free to just unmute yourselves and to ask directly, or you can field it in the text chat as well.
Okay. So, are there any initial questions in response to, and thank you for being patient, with my 20-minute monologue?
I always hold on to every word that you say.
Thank you, Anne-Marie.
I was just saying, like when you're saying that the client has to buy differently and they need to be educated, like if we're giving them a proposal that shows the value that they're going to receive by making the investment, and we've done the right story of the faster, cheaper, better, and identified our unique selling points. Why, like you said, that they still won't accept it if they were buying differently, but why does it have to be this? Oh, we're buying differently. It's just like if you've given them all the good news at the beginning, and then, oh, here's how we're going to contract for that good news. Why does you get such resistance? If this is there like sometimes sellers can be the weakest link? Is that part of it too?
It is. One of the things that I find often is that either in new product go-to-market formulation as part of the product strategy and that product management, product maintenance, or even on the professional services side, when you add up the number or the effort associated with offer formulation, the hours put into offer formulation versus the hours spent with a set of customers or clients asking them what it is they value and measuring what it is that they value, I find that there is this huge, huge mismatch. That more time is spent. Oh yeah, they'll love this. Oh, they'll really. Oh, you know what? If I put that number out there, if I put a $20 million value of selling this product or service to them, that's going to make all the difference, because none of our competitors are saying that. None of our competitors are quantifying that. What I found that in many cases, in post-deal review, especially in loss review, the customer or client comes back with, that number's bullshit. I don't believe that number. What have you done to actually get me to buy into that number other than other than exclaiming and or showing me a spreadsheet. Well, this will save you, fill in the blank, if you're doing this. And if they don't believe it themselves, it goes from the, well, it can't, right, well, we should make these claims, it's not going to hurt anything. Well, in many cases, those claims do hurt things. And what I've seen is if you're going to be making those kinds of claims, then the receiver at the other end needs to be willing to accept those kinds of claims. Otherwise, it just feels like more obfuscation, more confusion associated with the offer, particularly if it's not followed up very quickly by, and we're willing to be paid as a function of that. Because making a value claim and then backing off of it and saying, and we're going to price it traditionally, is where a lot of mismatch occurs.
Yeah, because I was just wondering if you could, like, I would just say AI legal, for example, the new services save tremendous amounts of time for very highly paid lawyers. I'm just using this as an example that we can all
Sure.
associate with. So now it's something that used to take them 2 days to put a court brief together. They get in 5 minutes. So, and that's 80% done, and they just have to check it and make sure. So now they can put so much more throughput through their systems, right? So the one person, instead of working on 10 clients, can work on 30 clients. I'm making this up, 30 clients. So that's a huge value. But like, to me though, what I kind of envisaged was you co-create the value together with the client. So you go through a series of questions. So you're not coming to them with a spreadsheet that's all done. Like, they co-create it together. And sometimes in the interest of scaling, because we can't be doing lots of custom bids because we'll never, we want to grow larger, quicker and simpler. Like that, we just charge a premium price. And we've justified that based on the co-creating the value.
Okay, so if I understand it correctly, we're talking about a product to sell to lawyers to help them save time.
Correct.
And increase
I'm going to make it up. The price today is $70K for the old product, and now we're going to ask them for $120.
Well, that's interesting. I really like the assertion of co-creation.
Yes.
Because similar to some of the earlier assertions is show me the person who actually believes in the value outcome here. And then by co-creating, then you've got ownership, you've got alignment both from the organization that is selling and the organization that is buying to say, we believe we're actually trying to solve a particular problem called cycle time or called the effort and money associated with creating briefs. That's a problem to go solve together. And the value associated with that is one that the notion of charging more is, if I understand it correctly, put through a different frame, which is old cost of doing business, new cost of doing business, and this is our cut. Which, if lawyers are good business people, good financial people, they would see that. The challenge is your ability to get them to understand that, and it sounds like you've got an exciting tiger by the tail there.
Yeah, it's just I don't know, like when you're doing these value-based offerings, you're talking to, like, how do you scale it? Or is each one an individual negotiation? Because I'm always thinking in my mind about scale.
Most certainly. In the beginning, it's very bespoke because you're actually trying to find a set of resonant responses or responses that resonate with your ultimate customers or clients. And from there, you start developing a template for what typically resonates that demands then you to provide a segment that is going to be most valuable, right? It demands you then go back into a segment. I have, if you will, made the mistake of finding value-based deals for pricing assessments that I've done in the past that have failed spectacularly because once I found one client that really resonated with it, I thought that it applied to all others who wanted to pay by the hour. And I spent much of my 2010s finding that out. which is, oh, wow, I could have a value-based deal. This could lead to a complete transformation. And as a transformation, I could give you a 10x return. Let's offer that to everybody. And the response I got was, I'm not even sure we have a problem here, and I really don't understand what you're talking about. So, oh, I'm sorry. Just want to do this in order. Brad, was Dem next on the list?
Yeah, Dem did have his hand raised, yes.
Okay.
Sure. Thank you so much, John. We are learning a lot from you. So I just wanted to, because shortly also untouched a bit, I liked a lot the word co-creation, because when we work with the clients, I think it's very important to define their value, so then to work together. And so do you think if we compare value-based pricing to other, let's say, time-based pricing and other models, we need to work more in co-creation value, because clients really want to trust the project based on value, rather than if it's a time-based, then look, we are not looking so much in depth for the value, but if this guy who is helping our project is not bringing us the benefits, then we just cut off the time. But in the value-based pricing, I think this is not the case, because you are linked to the value. So we wait. Do you think we should be working more in co-creation value together?
Oh, I believe, see, your case sounds very specific to professional services. And in the notion of professional services, especially around strategy or solution or go-to-market formation, co-creation, from my perspective, is absolutely the first step. Let's get to co-creation first, but understand that there's got to be a tiering of the way that you approach this thing. In many cases, I have seen, well, let me bring some statistics to it, right, in professional services. The statistics are this. Of every 10 deals that I've offered in terms of value creation, gain share, it goes under a variety of words. Of every 10 that I've offered, only one actually gets contracted. Well, why is that? Well, because, and I went through that list, which is from a leadership alignment perspective, in terms of the overall governance, in terms of the model and how you're going to get paid. You start presenting that back to the client, which is, well, you know what? This is co-creation. Both parties are responsible for the value that ultimately results. When the client then comes back and goes, I've realized two things. Number one, I have competing projects of which I'm not quite sure I could give this one the time necessary to fulfill all of the requirements from a governance perspective. And number two, you've done this a bunch of times before. I think you know something I don't know. And then they take a look at the economic model and see that you're going to be paid in multiples of what a fair market value might be, and go, well, maybe we just take this on as our portfolio of projects and go with something traditional. Now, that actually is not a failure in terms of selling professional services. It's actually a win, because in most cases, you're getting you're getting more, either in terms of the overall project and overall hourly rate. The total value of the deal goes up because you came at it from a value perspective. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Mark is next. Mark Richards.
Yeah, thanks, John. So a few comments, really. I think you're right to start with working with your potential clients, understanding the value you're creating with them is great. The challenge is obviously, can they actually value the outcome they're looking for? And if you are producing something that is risk reducing, or actually, taking it back to professional services, if you're coaching and mentoring someone, actually, a lot of it is peace of mind development, creating the skills within the team. That's much harder value-based, but I would still have that conversation about the outcomes and what does it mean for their business? What would success look like at the end?
Right.
You know, current state to at the end of a project, or the outputs and the outcome, and how that would be different, I think is a super valuable conversation just to get into their minds actually how you're going to make a difference to their business. Now, can you then align a pound or a dollar value to that? Potentially not, but you've opened it up to charge. What you can do then is charge on that outcome.
Yes.
And say, great, if we delivered that, you said, here's how that's going to make a difference to your business. Is that worth $20,000 to you if we achieve that outcome? And therefore, you're moving away from a daily rate to an outcome-based pricing. Yes, it's easier if you can get a dollar value to it, and everyone's bought into that. The finance team have bought into it, but you can still do it on an outcome.
Yes, Mark, that is you're making a distinguishing remark that distinguishes different approaches that I have found over time. And those approaches, let's see if you agree with this, are four. One is capacity, one is output, one is outcome, and one is capability. Let me explain each one. If you're providing a service to a company, capacity, I just don't have people that do this, right? That is more staff augmentation, or I need an analyst, or now some of those, are very expensive. When you're doing forensic accounting, that's pretty expensive, and it's a very specialized set of brain stuff that AI has yet to be able to absorb, but it comes on the hour. It comes by the hour. But it's still a capacity play. I don't have somebody that does this, and I'm willing to pay for how much time, right? It's input based. There's then output based, which is I'm going to sell you something, a thing. When you're done, you're going to have a thing. That thing is largely one time, like an information system or a study. And then there is outcome based. Outcome meaning that you're working differently and there may or may not be a value associated with it. So that's a particular outcome. And it's outcome-based pricing that allows us to do more value and value pricing associated with the outcome. There's more of a tie on that one. And then the last one I'm calling capability. And many companies are trying to shift to a capability perspective that says, well, it's not a one-time deal and it's not input-based, it's ongoing, this argument of SaaS or managed services. And so the value that you're selling them is, okay, you don't have this, but this is something you need all the time. And the value of doing it all the time has a particular value cell that can go along with it. It either saves you from the staff that you currently have or the way that you're currently doing it. And then you can place a subscription model on top of that aligns to it. And so it's those four different approaches that I find get really confused, because in many cases, I'll give you the classic example, which is, oh, I want you guys to deliver me either the assessment or a new information system, and I'm going to pay you based on value. I'm like, really? What value is that? Well, I'm going to pay you based on a set of milestones. It's like, that's no longer value. That's holdback. And there's a financing component that goes into it, which is I'm providing all of this input, and then at the end of it, you're deciding whether or not you pay me. There's some financing associated with that. Who's going to carry the financing? In many ways, clients don't realize, and we do a pretty poor job of letting them know that we've become their bank. We don't get really good rates over large corporations in terms of the way they borrow money. I would rather they go borrow the money than me go borrow the money, because it's beneficial for both parties. But quite frankly, many of us in professional services lose sight of that. And what we have to do is say, well, let's take a look at the cash flow model associated with a holdback scheme, and who's carrying the risk associated with it. Now, I don't know if I've actually landed on in supporting the assertion that you made, but it's a good one, which is if we're able to demonstrate a new way of doing things, the vision of what good looks like, you get far better return for demonstrating the vision in terms of being paid than demonstrating the input or the output and getting paid. Fair? Okay. I think
there's a question right now in chat
yes.
from Magda because her microphone wasn't working. She's asks, how do you best reposition the value story to customers that you internally align do not pay enough for the value you provide, and that is much harder than for new prospects?
Yes. Of course, we have to go back into the economic behavior of anchoring. So, and Magda, you're describing what the greatest challenges I have with most of my clients today that sell or have traditionally sold product is that they have an install base or they have a set of current customers. And being able to then demonstrate that, well, this is the way you were paying for it, and this is the way I recommend you paying for it going forward, is going to provide a huge challenge, because you're actually saying, I really need you to buy differently from me. And from that, there's going to be a group that is going to shrug its shoulders and say, I'm not doing it that way. And there's another group that is going to say, at the moment that you're able to demonstrate to me that this is more efficient, I'll buy from you. But that's a small percentage. And then there's another group that says, oh my goodness, now that you've made it clear to me, I'll pay more. But I've yet to find who that group is. Am I answering your question correctly? Because it's true. My sales organization, well, let me leap, if you will, if it's okay with you. I'm going to leap a little bit. Mm-hmm. Two of the companies that I'm working with right now are asking me this question, and I'm pushing back on them saying, I'm sure you have the right idea, and I'm sure these value stories make sense, and I'm sure the economics all make sense, because finance was involved and they came up with this fantastic economic model for how the offer should be made. And marketing said, this is, we have a group of customers that actually are demanding a new way of doing things. Guess who has been left out of the equation? Sales and variable comp. How sales is reviewed and how they're compensated is an important part of each conversation. And one of the clients I'm working with in particular right now, I've told them that I cannot start the project until I get the person who is financially responsible for variable sales comp planning and execution. And they went, why? Why is this about variable sales comp and execution? It's like, because, and I say this lovingly, sales organizations are coin operated. If there's the coin, they operate. And all too often, and I've seen this, where we launch a new product, we get it into the marketplace, and there's enthusiasm for the first 2 months. And then enthusiasm and engagement drops way off, and we go through all of these arm-waving engagement. Why are you not engaging? Why are you not pushing this product? It must be product marketing who can't tell the right story. It's the salespeople. Oh, the salespeople are coming back saying, you know what, my customer ultimately didn't want it. Well, they didn't want it because they really weren't. They got a half-hearted presentation of it. Why? I got paid better the old way of doing things, and it sounds so rudimentary for a pricer to sit back and go, if you want that to actually work, go pay your people differently and be willing to take the risk associated with somebody making a lot of money. There are some CEOs, and I love these guys. And by guys, I'm sorry, I'm using that as a colloquial Midwest, nothing to do with gender phrase, male or female, or however you identify. Love these folks who say, I don't care if my best salesperson makes more than me, says the CEO. That's okay. And I'm like, great, let's go align something so that we actually have every cylinder firing as we introduce the new product, because people should be enthusiastic and paid well by the ability to introduce the new product. Hopefully that answers your question.
Well, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I hear you better too. Sound great.
We
Denise, you
also
got
have
any?
a
Go ahead.
we have a raised hand from Denise as well.
Hi, Denise.
Oh, first a quick comment and then a question. So going to what Mark was saying, what would success look like at the end? What I've done in the past a little bit, Mark, is flipped it to what does failure look like if they take no action? And I was in fintech, so that's a lot of why failure is easier to sometimes get people to understand because of the risk and the oversight, the governance that goes on in there. My question, though, and so it kind of dovetails a little bit from what Anne-Marie was going on and what A was saying. But so what I've been trying to do, it's a workflow view that I'm trying to approach. So build the co-creation that we were talking, that several folks were talking about. But you need the client to provide the benchmarks. What has your engagement cycle been? How many days? How many people do you have on the team now? How long do they spend on each thing? And you have to have those benchmarks when you do that co-creation to be able to say, okay, this is the value of the time it could save, right? Usually say, or time you can reallocate, right? Because clients, if your buyer is within the group whose time you're saving, you don't want to make it sound like they're going to get laid off, right? And so, so how you frame it up, but just curious as to how much resistance you have seen with them wanting to provide those benchmarks, because if they give them to you realistic, you could then say, oh, there's this much value for you, versus if they bring them down some, then that helps shrink the sharing of the value.
Denise, as always, you ask the very interesting questions. One of the ways that I'm sorry, let me see if I can frame what you just asked. There are many economic models that when you show value, it actually provides less benefit or compensation to your company, because basically it's, let's take what you're currently paying me and reduce it. I've seen that there's a firm that I know of that sells risk management products. And in selling risk, and this is enterprise risk management. And so what they do is they take this huge assessment of a corporation globally, and they're able to come up with all these risk assessments and the reserves associated with the risk assessment. And they've placed the price on the size of the reserves. Based on these reserves, you're going to have to use our software to reduce those, which means over time, both parties, the customer is paying less to the software company because the customer benefits from reducing the size of reserves. That is a radical way of actually putting together the pricing. And by definition, and quite frankly, being able to look yourself in the mirror is saying, and that's okay, because you've provided the value. The real value was being able to capture what the problem was, size it, and then both parties agree that they're going to pay me handsomely as they work themselves out of a problem. But ultimately, they have to work themselves out of a problem. Now, the challenge to that software company is, well, let's go find something else that they might be able to manage and work themselves out of. But it is a very different or radical way of presenting that value prop that says, yeah, you're going to be paying more upfront because you have more addressable risk in the form of reserves than it will be in the future. To a certain extent, that is very attractive to the customer themselves. And quite frankly, I found in many of those cases, the customer says, you know what? The price that you're quoting is so huge on the front end, I would rather turn that into a subscription and then be able to then turn the dials based on working yourself out of a job, knowing that I'm actually buying this based on based on an ongoing management of my corporation. Did that get close to answering the kind of question you were asking?
It's one approach as to how to go about it. Yes. Mhm.
Okay. Yes. And so it's part of that co-creation. Having an offer that says I'm working myself out of a job is attractive. But I'm sure a board or a set of leadership would be like, no, we need more predictable revenues. It's like, yeah, but what are we in the business of? Right? We're getting back to the Simon Sinek why. Why are we doing this? Are we actually doing this to help, or are we doing this to make money? An interesting corner office conversation.
Very quick, John. Do you think this such a value we could define it with a financial specialist within customers, or CEOs, or what do you think?
Yeah,
Because
again, not knowing entirely the size or the complexity of the customers that you're talking about, financial analysts, while interesting, you have to ask the next question, which is, do they hold some sort of financial authority in the organization? I've had so many deals that have been made, offered to an economic buyer, and the economic buyer is like, ooh, I don't have the authority to make that kind of financial decision. And then they have to go then run it into the finance organization. And in many cases, they reveal to me the kind of authority that they had to begin with, which is nothing more than a budget and a scope. Well, this is what I need to go buy, and this is the budget that I have to buy it with. And then they say, I want you to put your skin in the game, and you make that kind of offer and say, okay, I'll put my skin in the game, but to have this skin in the game requires that your CFO signs off on it. And then they respond with, well, that's not part of the deal. It's like, no, that's absolutely part of the deal. I'm working a deal right now where the chief sales officer keeps telling me that they want me to go 100% gain share. They're not going to pay me $1 until they make $1. And I'm like, that's great. I'm happy to do that. I've done deals like that before. However, it means that I need complete control of your sales organization. Chief sales officer, that means I'm taking your job. To which they go, well, wait a minute, I run my organization. You just come up with good ideas. It's like, no, you're telling me that you want me to risk my paying my own people largely at your whim. Sorry, risk and control are part of the conversation the moment you say value. The moment you say value, you're talking risk, you're talking control, and it's all part of the equation. So we've got 1 minute left. Are there any other questions? These have been really good ones.
John, I had just two comments. First one, I kind of say that pricing equals effort plus outcome. So there's a baseline so that we can make sure we can pay our bills as we extricate these deals for higher value that makes sense for the client and for us. So that's just one thought. The second one is, you said that you had, of the 10 you offered, only one got contracted. The other 9, did you just price those then in a traditional manner?
Yes, many of them, well, if I were to break it down, I would say that of the 10 that were offered, 1 actually turned into a value-based deal. The other 9 can be broken into 2 places. Number 1, they never had the authority to do it, and we did it traditionally, but I got a higher rate associated with it. The other half was a set of performance caveats that allowed me, or performance provisos, better said, that allowed me to make more money as a result of particular performance, measurable performance outcomes. And so, although it was more traditional. So Anne-Marie, to your point, let me support you on this, on your assertion, which is this. When we contract with these clients, yes, one of the considerations does have to do with our cost. I know as pricers, we like to think, well, it's clients' willingness to pay, et cetera, but you need a baseline in something. And being able to pay your staff is something that the other party, you need to look them in the eye and they need to trust. Hey, I'm going to be paying my staff. And so typically these deals, these gain share deals, have a retainer cost base for you, and then a performance base, which is largely based on the economics of the deal itself. And so if both parties agree that we're taking equal risk associated with it, you tell the client, if you reduce the risk of me not having to pay my resources and it's only profit that I'm putting at risk, that takes on a different approach than if you're taking on all the risk. So, and they differ depending on your relationship, on leadership alignment, on governance, on experience set, et cetera, that both parties are willing to take. And I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if anyone's interested, but on my LinkedIn, I got an article on this. I got 13,000 views. So, John, I gave you attribution because it was based on our discussions as well.
Well, thank you. You've done a great job, Anne-Marie, of elevating and celebrating what it means to be a pricer. So thank you all for attending today. We're going to bring this to a close, and then I'll react to those that were looking for the specifics of how I put these deals together. Thanks, everybody. Take care.